We're going to continue in chapter 21 of the book. And before I get into that just a little bit, let me ask you. Somebody sum up for me the theme of the book of Revelation. How would you just describe it if you were going to, in a capsulized way, describe to someone what the book of Revelation is all about? God is in control. Linda? Jesus will have the victory. Here's the thing. Here's the thing you need to remember. The book of Revelation is teaching us about a tremendous conflict that is occurring. There is a battle that's going on between those who are faithful to Christ, those who are faithful to God, and with forces of evil. And the ones who are being described as the forces of evil have as their backing the devil. And so, it's just as someone indicated, you know, there's this battle going on, but the Lord wins. And so that's basically, if you want to just kind of get it in a nutshell, that's what we're looking at in the book of Revelation. Now, I know it's written in so many signs and so many symbolic, forms that is sometimes just overwhelming, and it is often confusing, and it's often a book that we just kind of shy away from, but we really shouldn't. If we understand what apocalyptic literature is, and we understand that our approach to apocalyptic literature is different than our approach, say, to the book of Proverbs, the book of Matthew, then it really kind of opens up a great book to give us encouragement and understanding. Now, on Wednesday, we got into chapter 21, looking at some of the things that John had revealed there. Well, what I want us to do is just think about some things, and I've got some pictures up here to kind of help visualize what it is that we're talking about. But in Revelation 21:5, the Bible tells us that God says, "Behold, I make all things new." Now, that's kind of an interesting approach, because throughout the book of Revelation, we read about new things. We read about a new name back in Revelation 2 and verse 17 in one of the letters to the 7 churches. That if you remain faithful to me, I will give you a new name. Furthermore, we read about in the book, we read about a new Jerusalem. We're going to talk more about that this morning as well. But he also talks about that back in Revelation chapter 3. And I don't know if you kind of bounce back and forth like that, but a lot of things that are said throughout the book are said a number of times. This New Jerusalem is one of them. And then there's a new psalm that the redeemed are going to sing. That's mentioned a couple of times in the book, chapter 5 and chapter 14. Now, in Revelation 21, we're going to talk about a new heaven and a new earth. We began talking about that on Wednesday. But when he talks about a new heaven and new earth, what is he talking about? Is he talking about, like the Jehovah's Witness would tell us, that God is going to purge out all of the sin of this heavens and this earth and create a new heavens and a new earth that we would dwell with in peace and harmony and so forth and so on? What's he talking about when he talks about a new heaven and a new earth? Now, I know we talked on Wednesday night about it being a new order of things. This is true. But how do we usually sum up this new order of things, Linda?
Well, the temporary, the old is going to be gone.
It's going to be gone. Well, what is the new heavens and the new earth? It's eternity. What do we usually refer to this as? We usually refer to this as heaven. So what he's talking about here is the eternal abode of the faithful. And so, I think sometimes, and I know, and I'm right there with you if you have this problem. Sometimes, even though we know we're dealing with figurative language, we tend to literalize this. When he talks about a new heaven and a new earth, yes, it's a new order of things. It's what we refer to as heaven. It goes back to what Jesus was talking about in John chapter 14. It's the many abodes in the Father's house. So he's talking about heaven here in Revelation 21 and 22. So remember that. When you look in the book of Revelation, new heavens and new earth, talking about heaven. Now, an interesting thing about this is that you're going to see in the course of chapters 21 and 22, you're going to see if I can use this term, it is kind of a poor term, a mixing of metaphors. And sometimes when he's talking about heaven, he's talking about the people who reside there, or the redeemed who are living there. Sometimes he talks about it in other illustrations. For example, it's going to be pictured as a city that's 4 square. And he's immediately then going to go from the city description to talking about a bride. But now all of this is referring to the same thing. It's all referring to heaven. So what we're seeing here, and we're going to kind of give a review of this, after all of these things transpire, after all of these things are carried out, after all the promises of God to destroy the persecutors are fulfilled, this is what the faithful will receive. A place in the city that's 4 square. A joyous celebration like a bride adorned for her husband. And then the third, now this gets over to chapter 22. Now the third picture of heaven is that of a beautiful garden with the tree of life blooming, with the healing of the nations, with the river that flows from the throne of God flowing through. It kind of really is a picture of a restored Eden. That, remember when Adam and Eve were removed from the Garden of Eden, they're separated from the tree of life. Now the Bible closes with the tree of life again being accessible to the redeemed, where we can live forever and forever in the presence of God. So these are the pictures that we have of heaven. Heaven is pictured as a city, 4 square, coming down from God out of heaven, a new Jerusalem. Heaven is pictured as a bride, adorned for her husband. Heaven is pictured as a beautiful, restored garden, where we will dwell in the presence of God. So again, you find the mixing of these metaphors. You find, and he goes from one to the other. He sees this city come down out of heaven, and then he talks about a bride adorned for her husband. But he's talking about the same thing. He's giving us a description of heaven. But let's see how we got here. Now we're going to get to the questions on the worksheet and talk about some of the things that are revealed in chapter 21. But let's see how we got here. Remember, we're dealing with Roman persecution. Rome was the premier superpower in the first century. And they controlled a land mass that went all the way from North Africa, the Persian Gulf, all the way up to Britannica. I mean, they just controlled the entire Mediterranean world. This new religion come along, this new religion of Christianity, and Rome, for whatever reason, thinking that it was, maybe subversive, they began to persecute. I mean, as far as their excuses, the devil's behind it. But they began this mass persecution of Christians. And, we can talk about, these are some of the things that we talked about throughout the course of our study. Christians were being put to death simply because of their faith. They were, burned alive as torches. That really began back with Nero. It subsided for a while under Domitian. It picked back up, and it even intensified after Emperor Domitian is concerned. It looked as though Rome was going to be successful in stamping out Christianity. That's what it appeared at the time the book was written. It looked like Rome was going to be successful. It looked like they were going to be able to eradicate Christianity from the face of the earth. A lot of these Christians may have thought that their faith was in vain. They may have thought that those Christians who died in vain, because the cause is going to die with them. It's not going to survive. Now, the fires of Roman persecution are revealed to us in the book as, well, let me ask you this. The three, hate to say things here, but I can't think of another word to use. The three things or figures that are used in the Scriptures, really beginning in chapter 13 of the book of Revelation, that describe the enemies of God's people. They're pictured as what?
Beasts, dragons.
Okay, a beast that came out of the sea is pictured as the enemy. The beast from the earth, which looked to be like a lamb but spoke like the devil. And then, of course, the great harlot in chapter 17. Now, these are... What John is doing here is using figurative language to describe both the empire, which is the beast that came out of the sea, forced emperor worship, the cult of emperor worship, which is the lamb that speaks like the devil, that has, a pair of horns that looks innocent, sort of like a wolf in sheep's clothing. And then, of course, the great city, Babylon, the harlot, which would, of course, be Rome. These are pictured in the book of Revelation as the Roman persecution, the beast from the sea, the great harlot, the beast from the earth. But, of course, it's the devil, who is pictured as a seven-headed dragon that's behind all of this. The devil is the one that is responsible for all of the problems that these Christians are encountering. And by the way, let me tell you something. If we reach the point in our Christianity of sophistication to the extent that we no longer believe in the devil, we already defeated. We've already lost the battle. I don't care how sophisticated, how intelligent we become. If we reach the point that we don't believe the devil is a real being that's out to destroy us, then we've lost, or we've surrendered. Because the devil is behind all of the forces of evil. That's been throughout the book. We've seen that throughout the book. Now this tells you who's behind it. The devil is behind it. He's behind the Roman Empire. He's behind the city of Rome, the great harlot. He's behind the false prophet. That is forced emperor worship. Now, that's kind of been the theme of this. Let's go back and just kind of review some of the things that's got us here. Remember chapters 2 and 3, after the vision of Christ in chapter 1. Chapters 2 and 3 dealt with the letter to the 7 churches of Asia Minor. Why were there only 7 letters written? Yes. Remember the numerology that we talked about, 7 being a perfect number. It represented all of those who were suffering. Now there were 7 literal churches. But the point of these letters, we need to remember, it's not just God flexing His muscles and kicking those brethren around that needed straightened. He's telling them, these are your strengths. Keep them. That'll take you through the persecution. These are your weaknesses. Correct those if you expect to get through this persecution. And so that was the letters to the 7 churches in chapters 2 and 3. Then we get into chapters 4 and 5. We get this vision of God upon His throne. Now, what would have been the significance of seeing God reigning upon His throne in Revelation 4 and 5?
He was looking like he wasn't around.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, it looked like that Rome was going to win. But hey, let's pull the curtains back. God still is on His throne. Then we see a picture of the Lamb who is worthy to open the 7 seals. The scroll that contained the 7 seals, what did we say that this represented? The 7 sealed scroll. David?
This is what's going to take place.
That's right. One of the first visions that we get after the throne scene is, God says, this is what's going to take place. Now let me open these 7 seals and reveal to you what's going to take place. There's the 4 horsemen that are revealed there, with the first horseman, of course, being Christ, the cause of Christianity going forth, followed by persecution and famine and death. And then there is the souls under the altar. What about us? What's going to happen to us? We've been martyred for the testimony of Christ. Wait. It's going to work out. Just hang on. Then there's this cataclysmic catastrophe that occurs at the opening of the sixth seal, of when God is going to begin to pour out His judgment upon the earth. And when we talk about pouring out God's judgment upon the earth, what's earth represent here? Is He going to pour it out on central Indiana?
Rome.
Rome, that's right. We keep that in mind. He's talking about Rome, the world, Rome, earth, Rome. And God is going to pour out His wrath upon them. Before the seventh seal is broken, there then is the sealing or the preserving of the 144,000. God is going to protect them. Who's going to be able to stand during this time? Well, these are the ones that are going to be able to survive all that. God's not going to bring judgment upon His people. Then the seventh seal is broken. That serves sort of a segue into the sounding of the seven trumpets. Now again, we're not looking at literal sealed scrolls. We're not really looking at seven literal trumpets. These are symbols that represent God is bringing judgment upon Rome. He's doing it in increments. Now, the seven trumpets, when they were sounded, how much harm did occur at the sounding of each trumpet? Anybody recall? A third. This is partial. God is doing this in increments. And so there's going to be a third of mankind harmed, a third of the rivers, a third of the sea, and a third of the earth. And all of this is unfolding. Then in chapter 12, it really begins a transition. Now we're going to really see the efforts of the devil. The devil is out to make war against the woman, the remnant faithful of Israel. It was about to deliver the man-child. And then, of course, we talked about his attention that he turned upon the man-child. And finally, he turns his attention. He couldn't prevent the birth of Christ. And the death of Christ was a crushing blow to Satan. And so now he turns his attention to those who are followers of Christ. That answers the question for these Christians. Why is this happening to us? Well, it's happening because the devil couldn't defeat Christ, and now he's trying to defeat you. Then there are the seven bowls of God's wrath that are going to be poured out upon the earth. This is going to be the completion. It's no longer a third, but it's a complete destruction of the persecutors, a complete annihilation of those who are trying to stamp out Christianity. Now also in the course of this, and when I spend a lot of time here, I'm just trying to get us up to where we are so we can understand exactly how important chapters 21 and 22 are. But in the course of this, there's going to be John eating the book. It's bitter. It's sweet but bitter. And then there's the two witnesses in chapter 11 that come on the scene that are killed and raised. And we talked about that. But the point that we need to see here is the bowls of God's wrath are being poured out upon the Roman persecutors. And then we've already studied about the demise of the great harlot, the sea beast, and the beast from the earth. They've all been now destroyed as we get over into chapter 19. The harlot has been turned on or been devoured by those who turned against her. The puppet kings, the empire has now been cast into the lake of fire. That is the beast from the sea. The false prophet has been cast into the lake of fire. But again, that gets back to what happened to the devil. Well, that's what chapter 20 is about. The devil who deceived them was cast into the lake of fire and brimstone, where the beast and false prophet are. They will be tormented day and night, forever and ever. Now, what did John see immediately after seeing the devil being cast into the lake of fire? Remember, this is in the plans of Christ all throughout the Gospels. Hell was made, Gehenna was made for the devil and his angels. What's John see immediately after that? Yes, that's right. John then sees what is often referred to as the great white throne of judgment. All the dead are before God. So what we see here, and here's what I'm trying to get, what we're seeing here is God has taken care of the persecutors. God has taken care of the devil. The devil's been cast into the lake of fire. Now, and heaven and earth has fled from the face of God. And now what we're going to do is get a glimpse into eternity. We're getting a view now of what's going to happen, not just to the first century church that was faithful and loyal to God, but we're going to see what happens to faithful and loyal believers throughout the existence of the earth in eternity. And so that's what we're kind of getting, really a good view of what's going to happen when it's all said and done. We're going to appear before the judgment of God. And I'm now back over into chapter 20. The dead, small and great, standing before God, and the books were opened. And another book was opened, which is the book of life. And the dead were judged according to their works by the things which are written in the book. Now, just kind of keep in mind, when you talk about the books being opened, you know, let's don't try to necessarily literalize that. Well, that would be the Old Testament, that would be the New Testament, that would be the Mosaic dispensation, and we've got, what it tells us is that God has a record in His omniscient mind of all who ever lived on the face of the earth. It's just talking about the divine record in the mind of God, really just kind of symbolizing the omniscience of God, the all-knowing ability of God. And when we stand before God, that we're going to be judged by the things that are written in the book, that is, by the things that we've done that are in the memory of God. But now, let's notice what he says in the latter part of that. Death and Hades delivered up the dead who were in them, and they were judged, each one according to his works. Then death and Hades were cast into the lake of fire. This is the second death, and anyone not found written in the book of life was cast into the lake of fire. This is what's going to happen to the beast, false prophet, the great harlot, those that had the mark of the beast, those who were loyal to the devil. This is what you're lost. You're destroyed. You're lost. Now he's going to shift in talking about the home of the redeemed. Now let's talk about those who were faithful. Let's talk about those who didn't sell out. Let's talk about those who didn't worship the image of the beast. Let's talk about those who were faithful to God. And so that's then what we're looking at in chapters 21 and 22. And keep in mind, he's giving us a vision of heaven here. This is the abode of the faithful. Now I realize that there are a lot of people who look at chapters 21 and 22 not as heaven, but as the church on earth that came through the Great Tribulation. Now, there may be some merits to accepting that position. I personally don't, because if you remember back in chapter 7, when he was talking about those who are going to have all the tears wiped out of their eyes, and they're not going to suffer anymore, they were already dead. They had already died. And they were promised that they were going to be in a place where there are no tears. And so we find the same terminology used in chapter 21. And so if it applies to the dead in chapter 7, I believe consistency is going to show us that it's applying to here, those who now are in eternity. So I think it's more profound than just simply thinking that it's the church that came through the Great Tribulation and their existence upon the earth. I think it's talking about the eternal home of the redeemed. And he does it in the sense of a city and a bride and a garden. Any kind. Now, I've done all to bring us up to where we are, so that we can appreciate chapters 21 and 22, perhaps even more greatly than we did without having that review. But anything you want to bring up, any comments you want to make before we look at the questions that are on the worksheet, because that's going to kind of try to help us see and appreciate the beauty of heaven as he describes it here. Any thoughts? Linda?
Well, just to support what you were just speaking of, I think of when Jesus was telling the apostles that he was leaving, but not to fear, not to worry, because he was going to prepare a place for them. Why would our scripture, why would our Bible end differently than what he told them would happen?
Yeah, I agree with you. And what Jesus was doing there in John 14 is really preparing the disciples for the fact that your world is about to collapse. You've been with me for 3 years. Your world is about to crumble. But don't worry. Everything's going to be okay. I'll come back and receive you. And I think basically what you're saying is true. This is what we're seeing here. Their world had collapsed. They lost Christians, family members. But it's okay. Here's what's going to happen. It's going to come out in your favor. And so I think he's talking about heaven. Let's answer the questions here. Where was John when he saw this great city descending out of heaven? Where was he? Huh? Okay, yeah. That's how our verse 10 points out. He was carried in the Spirit to a great and high mountain. Now, how was he carried to that great and high mountain? Huh? By an angel? Huh? Yeah. Keep in mind that he wasn't literally picked up and transported to a great and high mountain. He was not physically or literally transported to the top of some mountain. This was a vision. This was a vision that he was having. You remember what he said back in chapter 1 and verse 10, that he was in the Spirit on the Lord's day. Now he's telling us he's in the Spirit here. I'm receiving a vision from God. And so wherever John was when he received these visions, that's where he was here. But it was as though he was on a high mountain, seeing this great city descending from God. It's the same back in Ezekiel chapter 40 and verse 2. Ezekiel pretty much has the same terminology there in reference to a vision that he is receiving. So we're talking about a vision. You go back to Acts chapter 10, Peter had this vision when he was to go to the household of Cornelius. And so he was in the Spirit. He was, receiving a vision. That's what John was receiving a vision here. This, by the way, is the exact same event that he spoke about early in the chapter 21 and verse 2. He's not talking about two different cities coming down. But he's talking about the same event. He mentioned this in chapter 21 and verse 2. He mentions it again in verses 9 and 10. And the reason that he's mentioning it again is because now he's going to go into a lot more detail. He's going to give us a description of what it is that he is able to see. As we say here, the dazzling beauty of heaven. What do you think is the significance of the phrase "from God"? Let's look at that. What it said in chapter 21 and verse 10. Carried me away in the Spirit to a great and high mountain, and showed me the great city, the holy Jerusalem, descending out of heaven from God. What do you think is the significance of that? Now, before answering that, let me say, let's don't get too caught up with the question, how can heaven come down out of heaven? We see that. How can that be? How does heaven come down out of heaven? If you're talking about heaven here, if the New Jerusalem is heaven, how in the world does heaven come down from heaven? Lynn?
It's being revealed by God.
Being revealed? Being revealed by God? Lane?
Could be the church. Jerusalem is the church, the saved.
Well, and that's one of the things that they're using in making the case that this is really not talking about heaven. It's talking about the church that came down from God out of heaven. But I think it's the church not just successful in going through the persecution, but it's the church that go through the persecution that's rewarded. in eternity. And so that's a good thought, Dave.
I think the phrase "from God" denotes ownership.
Yeah.
These are God's people. The inhabitants of heaven belong to God.
Right, right. And so the emphasis is heaven is from God, as David pointed out. It owes its existence to God. It's God's abode. You know, it's as Jesus said in John 14, you know, in my Father's house are many dwelling places or many mansions. And so it's from God because it's His home. He's the source of it. The church, the heaven owes its existence to God, not to man. So that's the thing that you need to pick up from that. This from God. Don't get caught up in it coming down, going up, bouncing here. It's from God. That's the thing we need to keep in mind here. This is the abode of God. Heaven owes its source, its existence to God. Now, John begins the description of the heavenly city by stating that it had the glory of God. Now, consider what is said about God in Revelation verses 2 and 3, then tell what this means. Somebody read Revelation 4, 2 and 3. This is the throne scene. This goes back to right after the letter to the 7 churches. John sees God on His throne, the Lamb in the midst of the throne. And now what? Somebody read that. Tell us tell us what it said there in verses 2 and 3. He's in the Spirit again, by the way.
And immediately I was in the Spirit, and behold, a throne was set in heaven, and one sat on the throne. And he that sat was to look upon like a jasper and a sardine stone, and there was a rainbow round about the throne, in sight like unto an emerald. Okay,
now think, Charles. Now just here's where my question is coming from. I want you to think about this. We see what John is doing when he sees God upon the throne. He's describing God as this sardius stone or this jasper stone with a rainbow around God. And so what he does is he sees the glory of God. But now, as we get over here at the heavenly city, John begins by stating that the city had the glory of God. So what does that mean? We see the glory of God described in chapter 4. Now we see that the city, heaven, has the glory of God filling in. What does this mean? What are we talking about here? Lance?
Verse 22, even in this chapter, says that the city was illuminated by the glory of God. So we're talking about, and no need for an external light. Therefore, it seems to indicate a presence that is so, there's a light that is emitted and is so bright. His glory is.
Yeah, and I agree with what you're saying, appreciate what you're saying, but even I could tell by when you were saying it's really hard to put it into words. And I think this is what John is seeing here as well. God's holiness is what was observed when John looked at the throne. And God's holiness and God's radiance fills heaven. And His honor is reflected throughout. And so what we see here is actually, I think, heaven assumes the very description of God. And that's just absolutely mind-boggling. To think about being in the presence of God and just being in the presence of His glory. I mean, whatever came from the throne that John observed and tried to describe it by sardius stone or jasper stone, this is what's going to fill heaven, the radiance of God.
You can see that God is light. We've never seen pure light because we've always lived amongst the darkness and then as well. There's always darkness around us. And when we're in heaven, we'll live in pure light of God that we can't imagine.
So well said. And that is exactly the truth. We're going to be living in the light of God, in the radiance, the glory, the majesty of God. It is It is absolutely staggering to think about it, Dave.
When I read these verses here, I think of a song we sometimes sing that I stand in awe of you. You are beautiful beyond description, too marvelous for words, too wonderful for comprehension, like nothing seen or heard. Who can grasp your infinite wisdom? Who can fathom the depth of your love? You are beautiful beyond description, majesty enthroned above, and I stand in awe of you. That had to be what was going through John's head.
I couldn't agree more. Absolutely.
How do you write something to describe this?
Yeah. John is using some things that maybe, just maybe, we can relate to. But when you talk about the majesty of God, there's no relate. Okay, Linda.
When we think about what we've known about people on earth that have been in the presence of God, they couldn't even look on him.
No.
They could not look at him. And to think that we're going to be so changed and so blessed to be able to be with him in the same place that he is, that's what we're being promised.
Yeah.
We can't describe it
Well,
because we can't imagine.
What you mentioned there, Moses in Exodus 3, he couldn't even look. I mean, he's talking to a burning bush, and he couldn't even look up at God. Paul, in 2 Corinthians 12, he was caught up into the third heaven. He saw and heard things was not lawful for him to utter. And again, you're talking about the grandeur and the majesty and the glory of God. And the glory of God is that which fills heaven. That's it, Charles.
Yeah, God's sovereignty and power is going to fill that temple, period. And there's nothing evil or transgressive that's going to arise in that place.
Okay.
God's sovereign will be there eternally and without end.
Yeah, you're exactly right, and he's going to get into that in just a little bit. Now, let's think for a moment, and again, we're going to look at some things that John said. But I'm so appreciative of what David brought up about the song that we sing, "Majesty enthroned above," and the other things that he pointed out from that, because while we're going to be looking at a literal description, keep in mind that we're talking about something that transcends anything that we could possibly be talking about here. But John does use some very specific things to describe this city in verses 12 through 21. How does John describe its walls and gate? Or gates? Huh?
Great and high.
Okay. The wall is a great and high wall. What do you think we need to come away with understanding here? Protection. Every city in John's day had walls. They were walled cities to protect them from marauders. Will be protected. It has a high and protecting wall. What about its gates?
There's an angel at each gate, which...
How many gates were there?
And there were 12, 3 on each side.
That's right. 3 gates in each wall for a total of 12. And by the way, we talk about pearly gates. That's kind of a misnomer. Nothing pearly about these. They were solid pearl. They were not pearl inlaid. They were not inlaid with pearl. They were solid pearl, which kind of gives you an idea here that we're talking about symbolic. Can you imagine the oyster that big? So, we're talking about symbolic language here. You know, just again giving us a description of the grand and 12 angels at the gate, and again would be protected. What about its foundation?
Built upon God's will in all things.
Okay, but he's a little specific here.
12 foundations.
12 foundations with the names of the 12 apostles. Now I got a question for you. How many apostles were there?
14.
14. Who's left off? What do you think's going on here? Again, we're dealing with figurative language. Remember, you remember, I mean, we go back, the church is built upon the foundation of the apostles and prophets. That is through the preaching of the word. This is what we see here. And we're just saying something that, again, is symbolic here. When you talk about the 12 apostles, you're really talking about the work that the apostles of Christ did in promoting the gospel of Christ. What about its measurements? That is, its design. Come on, Myron, you get better than that. It's more than a square. What was it? It's a cube. It was a cube, which is kind of interesting. A cube, 12,000 furlongs. That's estimated to be between 1,300 and 1,500 miles in all directions. Like that. Somebody said, I didn't do this. I'm just relying upon somebody's expertise here. Somebody said that would have been an area about that size, right there, and then take it up 1,500 miles and form a cube. Is it really that size? Heaven really that size? Don, what do you think? What do we need to come away with here? It's perfect. This is true. Room enough for everybody who wants to go. You know, not going to be just a certain number. You know, that's only able to house 144,000. No, heaven is going to be designed in a way that we'll be able to be there. What about its construction?
Wall of jasper, city of pure gold.
Yep. It's a wall of jasper, which jasper means a spotted or speckled stone. What I've been able to find, it kind of comes in a variety of colors here. Jasper can, from clear to red. The city was pure gold, clear as glass, valuable as gold, and pure as the finest crystal. But again, this is all symbolic. It's just talking about the grandeur and the glory of God is indescribable. The only way that John could possibly, just think about the beautiful, light that comes through a prism. You see all of the lights reflected. It's kind of dazzling. And so what John is saying here is just the dazzling glory and beauty of heaven. And he's doing it in a way that is something with which we could relate. And the foundations were adorned with how many precious stones? Huh?
All kinds.
All kinds. And I think he lists 12. He lists 12 there. And hey, by the way, I'm putting all my commentaries on Revelation up. I'm done. I hope you've gotten a little something from the work that Mike and I put in. We've really enjoyed teaching the class. Mike's going to take us home on Wednesday night to finish up this fantastic book. So thank you so much for your participation. Jennifer's got stomach. That means we're probably in. Hey, had all my grandsons last night. He don't come no more. He don't come no more. Take us home, cowboy. Get us out of there.
Yeah.
Did y'all make it on time?
Yeah, we will.
I'm going to ask Robbie. Good.
I'll put it in the barn.
How late were you there, bud?